In the city of Taiyuan, there was a young scholar named Geng Qubing who had fallen in love with an abandoned mansion. It stood at the end of a quiet lane, its walls overgrown with wisteria, its courtyard full of moonlight and silence. Everyone said the mansion was haunted. Geng Qubing did not believe in ghosts. Or perhaps he did not mind them. He moved in on a September evening, alone, carrying only his books and a lantern. The mansion had been empty for years, and the emptiness had a texture. The dust on the tables, the cobwebs in the corners, the particular silence of rooms that had once been full of voices. But the garden was still beautiful. Peach trees, overgrown and ancient, still blossomed in spring. A small stone pavilion sat beside a moon-shaped gate. Geng Qubing swept the courtyard and lit his lantern, and felt, for the first time in years, that he was home. On the night of the Ghost Festival, when the living burned paper offerings for the dead, something changed in the mansion. Lights appeared in the upper rooms, not candles, but a softer glow, warm as amber. Voices drifted through the walls. Laughter, the smell of food. Geng Qubing pressed himself against the wall and looked through a crack in the door. Inside, a family sat together at a table, an elderly man, a middle-aged woman, and two young people. Fox spirits, he understood instantly. And then he saw her. She was perhaps 18, or perhaps 118. With fox spirits it was impossible to tell. She wore robes the color of pale jade, and her black hair was dressed with small jade ornaments that caught the amber light. She was laughing at something her cousin had said, and the laugh was sudden and genuine, the kind that cannot be performed. Geng Qubing, pressed against the cold wall, forgot to breathe. He had seen beautiful women before. He had never seen anyone like this. Her name was QingFeng, Green Phoenix. She noticed him before he expected, not with alarm, but with a calm, clear gaze that seemed to look past his face and into something behind it. She said nothing. She simply looked. And in that look was something that Geng Qubing would spend the rest of his life trying to understand, a recognition, as if she had been waiting for him to appear at that crack in the door for a very long time. Her uncle was not pleased. He was an old fox with white hair and suspicious eyes, and he had spent many years keeping his family away from human entanglements. Humans were brief, he said. Humans were trouble. Humans fell in love too quickly and fell out of it just as fast. QingFeng listened to her uncle's words with quiet patience. She did not argue. She simply continued to meet Geng Qubing in the garden each evening, when the moon was up and her uncle was asleep. They met in the peach garden, in the hour before midnight, when the blossoms fell like pale snow and the air smelled of spring water and old wood. She taught him things she had learned in 300 years of watching the human world: how to read clouds, how to listen to trees, how to know when rain was coming by the way the swallows flew. He taught her things she had somehow never learned despite all her years: how to feel the specific sadness of an autumn evening, the way a poem can say what the heart cannot. But even fox spirits cannot stay where they are not wanted. Her uncle found out. There was a night of voices raised behind closed doors, and the next morning, the upper rooms were empty and silent. The amber glow was gone. The laughter was gone. The smell of food was gone. Geng Qubing walked through the abandoned courtyard and found only a single jade ornament on the stone where she used to sit. A small green thing, still warm, as if just set down. He kept the jade ornament. He carried it in his sleeve as he searched the city, the temples, the riverside markets. He described her to strangers, a young woman in pale jade robes, with a particular kind of laugh, with eyes that looked past your face into something deeper. The strangers shook their heads or looked away. You cannot find a fox spirit by searching, an old woman told him gently. They find you. or they do not. Months passed. The peach trees bloomed and fell and bloomed again. Geng Qubing continued to live in the mansion, sleeping in the room closest to the garden, leaving the lamp burning all night as if to say, "I am still here. I have not moved." He wrote poems to her, not to send, because he had no address. He left them on the stone pavilion under a small rock, and in the morning they were sometimes gone. He never knew if she had taken them or the wind had. Then one winter evening, long after he had learned not to expect anything, the amber light appeared again in the upper rooms. Geng Qubing stood very still in the courtyard, afraid that if he moved the light would vanish. He heard footsteps on the wooden stairs, careful, familiar footsteps. The door opened. QingFeng stood in the doorway, her jade robes dusted with snow, looking at him with that same clear, unhurried gaze. She said, "I persuaded my uncle." She did not explain how. Her uncle agreed, in the end, to one condition, that Geng Qubing never ask where the Fox family lived, never try to follow QingFeng home, and never tell another person about their existence. These were not difficult conditions. Geng Qubing would have agreed to almost anything. He simply bowed very deeply to the old fox, who humphed and looked away as if trying to hide the fact that he was, quietly, a little pleased. They lived together in the mansion through the seasons. She moved quietly through the rooms, tending the peach trees, reading his books, occasionally correcting his poems in a small, precise hand that left his originals looking rough beside her revisions. He watched her with a kind of constant, wondering attention, she who had lived 3 centuries and still found things worth noticing. The way morning light fell on the courtyard stones, the sound of rain on old tiles, the precise moment when the plum trees decided to bloom. She was not quite human and did not pretend to be. Sometimes he would find her sitting very still in the garden at dawn, listening to something he could not hear. Sometimes her eyes, catching the light at a certain angle, would hold a warmth that was not quite the warmth of human eyes. He did not mind. He had chosen this. You choose what you choose, and then you choose it again every morning. They had years together. How many? The story does not say precisely. Fox spirits do not age the way humans do, and Geng Qubing, it was said, seemed to age more slowly than others. Perhaps love does this. Perhaps some presences in our lives simply make us more careful with time. The mansion's peach trees grew enormous and magnificent. Neighbors noticed that the place which had once been called haunted was now simply called beautiful. What stays with us is not the supernatural element, the glowing rooms, the Fox family, the conditions set by the uncle. What stays is something simpler. A young man who moves into an abandoned place and makes it home. A young woman who watches the human world for centuries and still finds it worth entering. 2 people who recognize each other through a crack in a door, who find their way back to each other after separation, who choose each other quietly, every morning, through all the ordinary seasons. The jade ornament is still warm. The lamp is still lit in the courtyard. The peach trees are still blooming. Some loves do not end. They simply continue, past the edges of the story, past the last page, into whatever comes after. This is what Pu Songling knew, sitting alone at his candlelit desk, writing stories about foxes and scholars, and the particular kind of love that does not ask the world's permission. He was right to trust the stories. The stories carry everything.